To the show, Derin. How you doing?
Tom, I'm great, man. Thanks for having me. Fired up for this conversation for sure.
Also fired up, and great to hear that you're down at the local library.
Yeah, I know, right? So they're fixing the internet. They're adding some fiber optic cables, I guess, around the neighborhood. And so I was trying to figure out. I said, "Oh shoot, I got this conversation with Tom. What am I going to do?" And found out,
Yeah.
the beauty of the public library here. Went down to got myself a room, and here I am talking to you. So
Oh, I
make
love
it
that.
work
Yeah, I love that hustle. A little bit of stress just to start just to get you going for the for the
for
afternoon.
sure, for
So it's
sure.
4 o'clock where you are in Arizona, a great spot place in the world. And we were just saying that yeah, the connection from I guess Australia to the US is pretty strong overall. And you recently had a Australian famous Australian on your podcast as well.
We did, yeah. Back in July, we had Bo Hansen, four-time Australian Olympian, three-time medalist as a member of the Australian rowing team, come on the No Show Dogs podcast and talk about team communication. And I can't think of anyone better really in the world than Bo Hansen when it comes to improving team communication. Guy's a rock star.
Yeah, love it. Yeah, I'm gonna have to listen to that one after this chat. But yeah, great to have you on the show because I was saying just before the show that I talk a lot about sports analogies, and it's great to actually finally chat with someone who has played professional sport, not just a has been like myself talking about my glory days as a real amateur in the sports that I like. So yeah, tell us about your baseball career. I know
Sure.
you've done a lot in baseball from playing through to managing. Yeah, tell us a little bit about your experience and your background there.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I can tell you, first of all, when it comes to has-beens in sport, we're all has-beens at one point, right? We can't play forever. So I definitely feel you there. So no, I played professional baseball for 7 years in the San Francisco Giants organization in their minor leagues, worked my way up, trying to make it to the major leagues. Went to major league camp a couple times. Unfortunately, fell a little short there making the team. Had 5 season-ending injuries in 7 years. So
Cool.
that doesn't make it advantageous, we'll call it, to make the major league club. We always say you can't make the club in the tub, and I'm living proof of that. So uh,
Yeah.
but fortunately in my time, I played well enough, built enough great relationships that when I retired because of injury, they asked if I'd stay on and coach. And so I ended up coaching and managing in the minor leagues for 5 years. And it was during that time when I really saw the impact of mindset on performance. And I just went, holy cow, I felt it as a player. And I can tell you, Tom, I never sought out mental performance coaches. I never sought out sports psychologists as a player because my view of that at the time was that's for the weak. Those are for the people that need extra help. I don't like, it's a sign of weakness. So I stayed away from it like the plague. And then when I became a coach and manager, I thought, holy cow, like this is a whole nother level we can tap into. You don't have to be sick to get better. Right. And so it was one of
Mm.
these things where it's like, how can I go be a better coach? And so went back to school, got a couple master's degrees. 2 master's degrees, by the way, doesn't add up to a PhD. It's just wasted letters, now that I got after my name.
Yeah.
But definitely had to learn not just the science of psychology, but also specifically sport and exercise and performance psychology. Like, what does that look like? And so went back, got those degrees, learned a lot, and then was fortunate enough to roll out the San Francisco Giants' first mental skills program. Started that in 2012, and did that there, and then also at the University of Notre Dame, and so on and so forth. I know you read the bio, but it was through that playing to coaching, then ultimately to mental performance, where I felt like my skills now in mental performance really suited me best, just because I've stood in the batter's box, right? Like I've stood out there, I've been injured, I've been booed, I've been cheered, I've been booed a
Mm.
lot more, but I've been cheered too, so I had those experiences too. And,
Yeah.
understood what it was like to sometimes connect your identity to your performance, right? And then have to
Mm.
learn to hey, I got to separate myself, right? Because I'm not my performance, it's what I do, it's not who I am, right? Type things. And so that's
Mm.
kind of my playing career in a nutshell and how it led to mental performance.
Yeah, great summary. I love that. You can't. What did you say? You can't get in the club in the tub.
Yeah, no, you definitely can't make the club in the tub.
That's.
That's for sure.
I
Yeah.
love that. Yeah, all those injuries, and that would have been just tough to deal with mentally. Did you find through that experience that you were able to pull a lot of lessons and learnings to then apply into your programs that you deliver to clubs?
Yeah, definitely. And it's definitely one of those things that I think most of us have these experiences in life, right? The things that show up that are unexpected that we
Mm,
definitely don't want. Um, but it's up to us, right, to make the best of it. Like one thing we talk about at ReliaQuest all the time, which is the cybersecurity company I'm at, and we talk about this equation E plus R equals O, which stands for event plus response equals outcome, right? Like we can't control the events in our life, but we are
mm,
in complete control of the responses to those events. And so if we want good outcomes, then we need to have better responses, right? And so we talk about this all the time. And so that was one thing I learned, right? Because I couldn't control the injuries. Now, obviously, going back, I was an overworker,
mm.
recovering perfectionist, so it's like I wasn't going to let anybody outwork me. And so that was my downfall, especially after trying to come back from previous injuries. And, but learn from that, right? Where it's like, hey, you got to listen to your body sometimes, And so those were all lessons learned along the way. But I think the biggest one was like, hey, you can't control what happens to you, but you are in complete control of what you do going forward, And that's one of the biggest lessons that I share. And it doesn't
Mm.
matter if you're in, business, sport, doesn't matter, And so it's just doing our best to choose the best response so we can get better future outcomes.
Yeah, love that. Yeah, I mean, there's so many times in life where there's curveballs that come your way, and yeah, the only thing you're right, the only thing you control is how you respond. Whether that getting yourself from the starting mindset, which might not be great, into more of a positive mindset. It's certainly something that in the workplace setting as well, like through the last few years, things have changed rapidly in the world, and over here, I'm sure it's the same in the US, is the hybrid workplaces, people working from home more. Some of that comes with some loneliness for the people that are working remotely, less connection in the workplace probably, or at least that there's that challenge for employers to create communities and connection in the workplace, whether that's in a location or whether that's online. So yeah, just having that, I guess, the mental skills themselves for individuals to make sure their daily performance is where they want it to be. I think that's critical. Now, when we talk about mental performance, or when you talk about it, being the expert, um, what does that mean, like overall? And I guess in the mental game of baseball. Now, I don't know a lot about baseball, but I assume from the biggest challenge is probably hitting the bloody ball when you're batting, right? Is that the main
Yeah.
mental game or challenge in baseball, or have I missed that completely?
No, and I've never heard anyone refer to it as the bloody ball. So thank you for that. So definitely that would be the biggest challenge. But I would say,
Mm,
well, let me back up. So Hall of Fame hitters hit 300, right? So they get a hit 30% of the time, right? So you're failing, you're not getting a hit, you're
mm,
getting out 70% of the time. And so
wow.
definitely that is a huge challenge when it comes to mindset. And I say on top of that is you're going to bat roughly every 45 minutes. You get
Right.
roughly, 30 to 45 minutes between at bats. And so if you think about that, you have a lot of time to think about what you did to screwed up and then, and then overthink the next one. And so it's just so important, right, to learn skills
Mm,
around being present, right? And how to take the lesson from what just happened and leave the emotion behind, right? Easier said than done. I know it sounds simple. We know simple ain't easy, but
mm,
I can tell you, like when we talk about mental performance and the mental game specifically in baseball, what we're talking about is readiness and awareness. Those are the two biggest things. Like we talk about mental performance, it's readiness and awareness. Like awareness around situational awareness, game awareness, self-awareness, opponent awareness, right? Are you aware of kind of what the game's asking you to do in that moment based on the person that you're competing with, right?
mm.
And then readiness is like, do you have a plan that allows you to fully commit to the thing in front of you? So when you think about business, though, it's largely the same
Same
thing.
thing. Yeah.
Situational awareness, self-awareness, right? Readiness. Are you ready to go into the presentation? Have you prepared appropriately? Do you know the customer, right? Do you know your teammates, right? So it's all the same thing. So when I talk about mental performance, those are the two big things I'm talking about are readiness and awareness.
Yeah, I love that. Gee, I'd just really suck at baseball, having all that time between batting. Far out. I'd make
I,
them. I'd be in my own head. Is that why they all chew tobacco, or is that something that I've seen from years ago?
No, you know what? It's there's actually now, science that supports not tobacco, but science that
Mm,
supports having something in your mouth, right? And how our senses can help us be present. So that's why chewing gum or sunflower seeds, or, some people chewing tobacco, whatever it might be. Because you think about it, Tom, you can't taste in the future. You can't taste in the past. If you're tasting something in your mouth, that brings you fully present, right? Or the smell of fresh cut grass, right? Or maybe it's using your senses as eyes. Like, what do you see right now? And why is that thing there? Maybe get curious about it. But those are ways to use your senses to bring you to the present moment. So it is funny you mentioned tobacco, but players for years did it. Why? Because it made them feel better. But now we realize, oh, why? Because you're enjoying the thing that you're tasting right now. And that taste brings you to the present moment, which allows you to be the best version of yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting. With the performance overall of baseball, but also just in workplaces or careers as well, what's really the most important part of performance, do you think? Obviously, you're mentioning staying present, but is there more to performance in your view?
Absolutely. Obviously, being present is a big one. But guess what? If you're really prepared, you can still do a pretty good job if you're not fully present. Now, you probably maybe not as engaged, or maybe won't enjoy it as much, those types of things. But another thing that I think is a really important mental skill to have is to learn how to act different than you feel, right? It's to be mission driven versus feelings driven, because our emotions go up and down all the time. And if we let our emotions dictate our behavior, well, then guess what? Our behavior is going up and down all the time. Now we're inconsistent. We can't be trusted by our teammates. We can't be trusted by our customers. We can't be trusted by our leaders, right? And so I think learning that skill to say, hey, I don't feel great today, right? And one way that, and here's just a simple example how we can do that. Instead of saying, I'm angry, we can say, I'm feeling some anger, right? So you can begin to distance yourself from that feeling, right? That emotion is just something you're experiencing. It's not you. But if you start to say, I'm angry, well, now that becomes a part of your identity. And now your behaviors will probably not be as clean versus if you just go, hey, I'm feeling some anger right now, right? It allows you to separate from it, deal with it a little bit better. And so I think having the mental skills to learn how to be mission driven instead of feelings driven, right? I say this all the time, like emotions, let me say this, emotions, great informants, terrible dictators, right? It's like, we should be aware of what we're experiencing, right? I'm not saying ignore how you feel. What I'm saying is, be driven by your commitments, because people are counting on you, whether that's teammates or customers or whoever. And then, the feelings. And then this is what I've learned along the way too. If you can push past those temporary feelings and honor those long-term commitments, you'll end up feeling better in the end, because you're like, you know what? I did what I said what I was going to do. And that feels really good too. So I think that's a really huge thing, other than being present, is learning how to operate different than how you feel.
I love that. The other one that I hear a lot, or have heard throughout being a leader myself, and it's no diss on anyone that's said this to me, but it's the reframing of I'm anxious. So I'm anxious, or I am feeling, go in a little bit more to what you're feeling. And I think sometimes and anxiety and depression are big issues, obviously, in the world. But sometimes I think with the amount of content or information that's out there, we can quickly label ourselves as, I have anxiety because I'm anxious, versus I'm feeling stress because I'm uncomfortable with the thing that I have to do today because I'm out of my comfort zone. So maybe controversial in saying that and bringing that up, but I just think there's a real skill in being able to put down what you're really feeling deep down. What are you feeling, and why are you feeling it? It's very similar to what you were saying just then.
Yeah, you're spot on, man. I mean, that's why cognitive behavioral therapy works, right? Because it's like you change the way you look at things, right? And I talk about this with my teammates as well, is like our perspective drives our thoughts drive our emotions, and it's our emotions that influence our actions, right? So if you want different thoughts and different emotions, change your perspective, right? And so, which is just what you explained beautifully right there. And it is having that ability to reframe, right? So you can put yourself in a better headspace, so you can think about something a little bit differently. And specific to anxiety, side note is, and I heard this a few years ago, is that, when you're experiencing, when you're starting to experience that, is to think about something that you're grateful for. And what we found is that you can't be grateful and anxious at the same time. it's two different parts of the brain. And so when you start to feel that stress and it starts to become anxiety, and you start to negatively interpret that stress as anxiety, as quickly as you can, think about something that you're grateful for, right? Are you grateful for, could be your family, could be your job. It could be the fact that you still have a job, right? It could be the fact that someone's counting on you, right? I love the fact that someone's counting on me. That tells me that they trust me, right? So just little ways that I think you can look for ways to be grateful in everything that we do. It's not always easy, right? But it's definitely helpful to know, it's definitely helpful to know, like, hey, what can I go to if I don't want to feel this thing and I need to get away from it?
Yeah, yeah. And just to add to that, I've got some good friends, and they're just the most giving people in the world, always doing things for their community and getting involved in social aspects of, the local community. And I'm always impressed because I am involved, but not as much as them. And I'm always kind of, how do you have so much energy for this? And its simple answer was because it makes me feel great about myself. So sort of that, as well as gratitude, is like the giving back to people. Can kind of be a bit of a hack for feeling better about things overall. Derin, in workplaces, and the same in sporting, this is where I draw these big analogies from, or comparisons, but leadership's clearly one of the most important aspects of workplace success. So we know research supports that if you've got a great manager who is really invested in you as an employee or a part of the team, you perform better. You're more engaged, and further to that is, if you have a best friend or a good friend in your team, you're more likely to hang around the workplace for longer, and obviously be more satisfied with the work you do and more engaged as well. I'm just wondering, like, from your perspective with these mental performance and these skills that you teach in sporting clubs or in baseball, how important is the leadership buy-in for you when you're rolling out these programs?
It's everything. It
Yeah,
really is
yeah.
everything. I am telling you. And that's why I'm at ReliaQuest, because our founder and CEO brought me in, right? I mean, he has been all in on mindset since he founded the company in 2007. And so it was an easy transition for me to leave professional sports full time and go into cybersecurity, knowing nothing about cybersecurity, by the way.
Yeah.
But I do know what great leadership looks like, and I do know what it's like to be believed in, right? And I do know what that feels like and the work that you're able to do. And so it was an easy move for me. And I have been in situations before, though, where the coach is just checking a box. The leaders just check, oh, we got to have the mental performance person. And so you're there, and guess what? The players feel it, or the employees feel it, right? They know that the leader's not bought in, nobody else is going to be bought in, right? So you can have the best content in the world. You could love the people in front of you. You're there to serve them the best you can. But if the person in charge doesn't believe in what you're doing, you're just spinning your tires. And I've made those mistakes. And fortunately now I'm in a position where if I get that sense, I just say no. I say, hey, I'm not the right person for you. Early on in my career, I'd say yes to everything because I needed reps. I needed work, and I would just do everything. But now, fortunately, I said enough yeses along the way that now you can go, hey, I need a leader that supports what I do, because it literally is the game-changing moment. It's like, doesn't matter how good your content is if your leader doesn't support what you're doing from a mental performance space.
Yeah. And in some of those earlier years, 2010 where you started delivering these programs? Your first program, was it 10 years ago? Or
2012. 2012 is when I first started. Like, that's right when I graduated, boom, went into delivering these programs. So yeah.
Yeah, and at that point, was mental performance for these clubs, was it quite innovative at that point in time, or like the reception that you received from players? Was it like, what's he doing here, or were they ready for this at that point in time?
No, I love the fact that you called it innovative, because
Yeah,
that's like the positive word. The other word was like, what is this guy doing here? Exactly what you just said.
yeah.
So it's been so fun, Tom, to watch the evolution and the acceptance of this, right? It's been a blast, because I can tell you in 2012, it was tough. It was still like behind the curtain. It was like, I don't want to talk to you. How are you going to help me? You've never pitched, or, like all sorts of things, And so you hear all these things, and there's definitely a lot of quote unquote battles you got to fight. And, even just with coaches too, because they don't understand and they think maybe you're undermining them, or they think it's the player coming to complain about me. Right. And so there's a lot of insecurities all around the organization, and it's all that fear, uncertainty, and doubt that makes you really ineffective in what you're trying to do. And so, early on, it was definitely like that. And I would say probably 2018, 19, it felt like it really started to turn where players weren't asking, what do you do? They started asking, where is our mental performance coach? And then especially highlighted after COVID year, I think, a lot of people realize like, oh, hey, there is something to mental health. There is something to mental performance. And this is something I got to take care of, my mindset. And then we got to be proactive in it. Right. And that's kind of, that's been my approach forever. I said, kind of at the beginning of the show, we don't have to be sick to get better. It is one of these things where I view myself as like a personal trainer or a strength coach or a nutritionist, right? It's like, hey, how can we get from, balance to thriving in optimal states, right? And so it's definitely been fun to watch that evolution, and it's been fun to be a part of it for sure.
That's great. So moving past those, I guess those roadblocks early on, because I feel like some of the stuff that I do or my business does would have at that point in time been seen as innovative, and now it's seen as a need in some of these workplaces where we're delivering education, but really what we're trying to do is impact performance at a real high level. So when baseballers or players come to you now and they're in that proactive sort of mindset, what are they asking you? What do they really want out of you? I would imagine, my guess would be that there's too much going on in the world I'm picturing younger guys than us. Imagine all the social media crap coming at you, and like you're kind of filtering all this stuff coming at you, which just makes your brain a little bit fuzzy, I reckon. I wonder if is that what you get, or so that present, being able to be mindful and present in the moment, is that the biggest thing?
Yeah, I would say, I think it depends on the age, right? I think like younger professional athletes, when I say younger, I'm talking 20 to 25-ish. It's generally social media. Like, how do I handle all the new distractions, all the new, unfortunately, haters on social media, all the new expectations, pressure that's being placed upon me by the organization? And how do I handle viewing, like, how do I see myself? Because they've always been the best player their whole life, right? They've always been the big fish in a small pond. Now they're just a fish in an ocean, right? Talent used to separate them. Their physical talent separated them. Now it makes them equal. And so now, because they've always played the comparison trap, because the comparison trap worked for them because they were the better athlete. Well, now, they're on a level playing field. And so now they're really struggling with like, am I any good? Can I do this? Right. And so I think early on that tends to be the struggle. And then you get older athletes that are in their, I call it probably early 30s to, late 30s, when they're trying to get that last contract. They're trying to get that one that's going to set their kids up for success. Like they're trying to hang on just a little bit longer, and they're learning how to accept the fact that what got them there is not going to be the thing that keeps them going. And they're trying to reinvent themselves, and they got to see the game a little differently. They got to train a little differently. And what happens is you start to lose confidence, doubt starts creeping in, because you're like, well, I used to be able to do this. Now I can't. I was like, hold on, you can still be effective in the team. Like, let's just step back for a moment, and then let's look and see how we need to approach this. And so I would say older athletes, it's more about, how can I reframe the way that I work so I don't doubt myself when I get in competition, because I can't train the way I used to train. I can't prepare the way I used to prepare. And and I say this all the time, like preparation, what happens when you show up in that batter's box, that little voice of doubt, the less you prepare, the louder that voice gets. And so it's a tough thing, as you become an older athlete and you can't prepare the same way, to go like, hey, how can I quiet that voice of doubt so I still can compete at a high level so that the team still wants to employ me. Right. And so I think it just depends on the age.
Yeah. And I think in careers as well, like if you think about going from, let's say, high school, you get good grades, you then go to university, you're the smartest kid in high school, then you go to university, now you're as smart as everyone else, and maybe there's someone that's smarter than you. Then the next challenge is getting a job and getting hired, also maybe looking across at the person next to you who's on the same level or smarter, you start doubting yourself. There's that inner critic that comes in your inner voice that comes in your head, and then suddenly you kind of then you go through your early career and you're the best technician, and then suddenly you're like, oh, who wants to become a manager? Well, it's probably the person that's got the best skill in this particular technical skill. Let's promote them. And then they've got no awareness of how to be a good leader or good manager, because for all their life they've been told they're really smart, and then suddenly you got to actually not be the smartest person in the room. You need to facilitate the smart people in the room. So it's kind of it's not too dissimilar really from a sports versus career progression type thing.
Absolutely. And that's why I'd say, Tom, why humility is a key trait of high performers. Because every time you get moved up the ladder, you get promoted, you got to learn a whole new set of things. And if you don't have a spirit of humility, you're not going to figure it out. You're not going to ask the right questions. You're going to try to fake it, quote unquote, till you make it, right? And then you're going to screw up more things than you help, right? And so it's just one of those things. That's why humility is such an important trait that I've seen over and over and over again in the highest performers, because it is learning how to navigate career changes, learning how to navigate new responsibilities and, new expectations. And you just got to be open and honest with people. Say, hey, I need some help here. What did you mean by that? Hey, can I get some clarification? Hey, can you help me with this? Like, that's totally okay. That's the only way that I've seen at least high performers be able to be high performers for a long period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that massive challenge from being the best technical performer in work to then becoming a manager is just something where we see in my line of field where people just fall off because they're just like, I don't know how to do this. I'll just keep doing what I'm doing. If you see it in sales, you see it in sales a lot as well, where the best sales performer, then they say, oh, you should be a manager of people, and they just don't know what to do because the skills aren't there, and the mental skills haven't been developed. You might be pleased to know, Derin, in schools over here in Australia anyway, there's some really great mental skills training that's getting done in very early sort of childhood. It's quite fascinating. I've got a 3-year-old and a 7-year-old, and my 3-year-old's coming home with like a bit of paper that talks about feelings and really clarifies how he's feeling on the day. And my daughter in a similar way, talking about she's got a subject that she does called respectful relationships, which is really great, and she tells me all about it. So it's kind of like, I feel like the awareness now is there to sort of I feel like I'm 40. I reckon I missed all that. And so I've probably gone through that thing where I was good at something, now technically good at something, struggled as a manager, figured it out through lots of failing and continual failing and learning and reflecting, but somehow putting a positive, like keeping that positive mindset about things and being reflective, I think, as well. So I just thinking, so maybe the future generations have a bit more hope from in this, in terms of just knowing from the early ages what this is all about. When we're talking about older employees, though, let's say 40 plus, this would be, or 50 plus. Some of this stuff wouldn't be foreign to them. They'd have the awareness, but they've probably missed a lot of that early education. How do you kind of go about bringing this to them, the mental health or mental skills training? Is there anything in particular that you would focus on? Because I imagine some of these coaches that you're dealing with as well are in that older bracket, perhaps.
Sure. And I think that was probably one of the bigger challenges when I first started was the age of the coaches and the age at which I started doing this. Fortunately, some of the coaches that I worked with watched me play, or, they even maybe coached me or whatever. So that brought its own challenges. But I think what I've learned with the older generation and working with those older coaches is that we're all talking about the same thing. They just call it something different, because they've been in the game a long time and they've seen a lot of stuff. And if you're still in it, you've probably mastered a lot of these mental skills. You might not call it self-talk. You might not call it self-efficacy. And, you might not call it visualization. You might not call it all these things, but you're still teaching the same concepts, right? So a lot of times I just went in and asked questions, ask them, hey, how have you been able to do this? Like, what are some things that you've learned along the way? How did you help this player that struggled getting over that? And what I showed them, like, I just tried to disarm them right away and say, hey, I love that, man. That's awesome. Like, I would have done the same thing. Or it's like, hey, that's the same thing I'm saying. Like, I call it this, you might call it that, right? And so quick example, we had a pitcher left-handed pitcher, I remember. And he was struggling a little bit. And what happened was he was just in between. He wasn't convicted to throw the pitch, right? And so in this conversation I had with him, he's always like, well, catcher calls a fastball, and then I'm like, should I throw it? What if he hits it? And I got to the point where I just said, hey man, like, let's just come with a mantra. Let's just come up with one simple thing that you can tell yourself, and then that'll allow you to get to full conviction to throw the pitch. And he said, okay, let's go for it. And so we worked through it, and we got to see it, believe it, conviction. That was what he's going to, before every pitch, he's going to tell himself, see it, believe it, conviction. See it, believe it, conviction. See it, believe it, conviction. Perfect. So after the game, it was the best he'd ever pitched. It was awesome. And so I'm all proud of myself, right? I'm thinking, hey, I must have done good work. So I go up to him and I said, hey man, what were you telling yourself the whole time? And he said, man, that really worked. That mantra worked. Before every pitch, I just tell myself, convictment. I'm all,
yeah, right.
Not even a word. He made up his own
awesome.
word. Yeah. But the point was, it got him to
roll with that
commitment, right? Yeah. And so I was like, yeah, perfect. Fist bump.
Convictment.
Well, yeah, convictment, and it's like, convictment's yours, and, but, share that story with coaches, and it's the same thing. Like the coach is like, hey, you got to have full conviction or fully committed, or combine the words, whatever it is. But it's about simplifying our thoughts, right? Because if you can simplify what you're thinking, obviously the more clear you are, and then the more clean your actions are, and your body will do what you've trained it to do, So anyway, that's one of my favorite stories, because I thought I did a good job and I really did nothing. He made up his own word, but it's the power of mantras and simplifying thoughts, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, that sounds awesome. Yeah, there's a saying in Australian rules football, AFL is the sport in Victoria where I am. And you may or may not have seen it. It's a pretty rough sort of sport, but yeah, there's a sort of a saying, which is, and it's very simple. It's see ball, get ball. So it's kind of like when the ball goes to ground, just bloody go, like just go for it. And I think when you watch junior sports, and I coach my daughter's basketball team, the kids that are simplifying the game, as in they just go for it. Like these are 7-year-olds, so they're not, highly skilled yet, but they just break it. And I love coaching them because I get to simplify the shooting, the shooting process. Bend your knees, flick your wrist. I don't know what I say, I can't remember, but it's so simple. And these girls, I did it last night, and there was one girl who's been shooting it weirdly, and I just said, yes, like, have your feet shoulder width apart, and she just corrected it straight away, being young, being able to just adapt to advice or tips, and she was just training them. So then it was like, cool, just keep doing that.
I love it.
Keeping it so simple.
What it made me think, Tom, when you just said that, when we talked about being simple, and I mentioned like the 21 to 25-year-olds, and then the 30 plus year old, the 26 to 30-year-old, that's the work you're doing, is how can you simplify the game for them, because they've got past all the distractions. And now they're really diving into the science of the game, and the science of their swing, and the science of pitching. And they're starting to understand, they become a student of the game. And then what happens is they become over analyzers, and then they think too much. And so it's almost like, how can you learn and to master the craft without letting it paralyze you? So anyway, I just wanted to share that as you were talking, it just reminded me, like, that window is like, you got to help them simplify.
Yeah, all the analytics now would, again, do my head in if I was playing any sport at a high level. There's just too much data and analysis, but it's good. Like in basketball, one of the better shots is a corner 3-pointer statistically. So basically, the game is played like that, where you've just got guys standing in the corner shooting threes at 40% or something. But yeah, it's interesting. You wouldn't know that unless you had the analytics, but also it kind of ruins the flow. And you can see players overthinking as well when they know these types of things. In workplaces or in careers, it's also the same. I reckon you get into that expert mode. You almost know too much because you're too technical. So then at the director level or the head of the team level, it's you're simplifying things for others, and it becomes coaching conversations. And what you were talking about earlier, when you were meeting the coaches and you were talking to them, it sounded like a coaching conversation. What are some of the things that you sort of have in your head when you're having coaching conversations? Because in leadership, basically, that's all you really need to do.
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think some of the things that I go into these coaching conversations, one is I want to find out what's important to them,
Mm.
how do they define success? Because I think that's a really big one, because I've found along the way that a lot of times we define success by results, which we should,
Mm.
but there's a difference between what matters and what's helpful, right?
Yep.
Because we can't control results, although they matter. What happens is if all my coaching is towards results and I don't coach the behaviors that lead to those results, that's when we get in trouble, right? So a lot of times I find, like when I go in and work early with coaches, it's, what's most
Mm.
important to them, how do they define success? And then if it gets anywhere on things that we can't control, right away I start talking about, hey, what are some things that we can control? What are some things that lead to those things that are important? What are some things that lead to those results or success, right?
Mm.
And so that's early on what it is. And then we move on to, what do you want to be known for, right? It's like, what type of leader do you want to be, right? So like, let's decide now how you want to show up later. Let's pre-decide, because what's going to happen is, we talked earlier about E plus R equals O. Well, how do you choose a great response, right? There's an event, there's a thing that happens that I can't control. How do I choose a great response? Well, you've already identified your core values, or how you want to show up, how you want to be remembered, whatever it is for you. If you know that, well, then now you know the type of response you want to have, right? If you want to be known as someone that's a great listener, guess what you're going to have to do when stuff hits the fan? Ask questions and listen, right? You maybe want to fly, but hold on. If you want to be known as a listener, right? Let's step back and let's listen. Or, hey, I want to be known as empathetic, or I want to be known as a hard driver, maybe, whatever it is. But I think if you pre-decide before, then that allows you to combat those emotions that are trying to, muddy your vision. And then you act according to your emotions versus acting according to your commitments and your core values and stuff like that. So it's early on, it's establishing a lot of that, right? It's like, what do you want to be known for? And, what does good look like and success for you?
Even those two, they're fantastic questions to have in your pocket as a leader. As soon as you open that up, and why I'm passionate about those two questions is because in remote workplaces now, it's sometimes a little hard to connect with people, but with a couple of open-ended questions in your pocket, you can pull them out. You'll get a lot out of people, and I guess, you'll understand them better. Not meaning you'll just get work out of them. The biggest common problem that I see in workplaces, and I think I've done it before as well, just being a bit of an amateur in my early business career, is just going straight for KPIs with everything. So yeah, cool. You do this, and that's the result that we need. So it creates a production line feeling. There's no linkage to the vision of the business or the mission, but also what do you want? Like what's good for you? And also, how do you see yourself each day? Like, there's just so many good questions that you can ask to get a real sense of someone. And I think that's kind of missing for leaders. I know through the last few years, managers have really struggled to connect with people. It's just because I think they didn't have the questions or the tools in their toolbox to pull out at the right time to have the conversation. And it's an ongoing thing as well, obviously, with workplaces still investing heavily in leadership programs. And it's a problem that's never going to be solved and only going to ramp up through more change in the next few years, no doubt. With mental performance coaching, which is obviously what you're doing, the programs that you run, like, it sounds like every business should have this, or at least have access to this. And I know not every business does. Sometimes it's more, in Australia, there's a thing called an EAP program, which is employee assistance programs, which is basically when you're at your worst, when you really have gone through an incident, go and chat to a clinical psychologist to work through things at a really downstream level when you really need it. There's obviously a lot we can do upstream, is the term that we throw around here in Australia. I'm sure you've heard it before, which is more the preventative stuff. So, yeah, do you think this is stuff that all workplaces need? Would you agree?
I understand I'm completely biased, but 100%. I mean, military, I don't know about the Australian military. I know the U.S. military has been investing in mental performance for 40 plus years. I know professional sports franchises have been investing in mental performance coaches for 40 plus years. Why? Because it works. And so like here's a way that I try to get people to buy in to understand it. So when we think about physical health, right, we all understand physical health really well. Like there's this view it as on a spectrum. So we'll call it on the far left side over here, when I'm broken, when I need put back together, I go see a surgeon. Like everybody knows that, right? But sometimes I don't always need a surgeon. Sometimes I'm just sick. Sometimes I just am ill, right? I just have some symptoms. So I don't go to the surgeon. I go to the doctor, right? And roughly in the 1970s in the United States, what happens is jobs became more sedentary. So when jobs became more sedentary, the environment completely changed. Our environment changed, and because our environment changed, our physical health changed, and cardiovascular disease went through the roof. Well, since cardiovascular disease went through the roof, we figured, hey, our environment changed. We need to be more proactive in our physical health. And that's the birth of physical fitness industry. That was strength and conditioning coaches, nutritionists, personal trainers, gyms blew up everywhere, right? Early on, people were like, why are you going to the gym? Right. Well, it's like, well, because the environment changed, right? So
jogging,
look at
mental.
Yeah, right.
Jogging,
but mental health, right? Mental health is going to be the same, right? There are times when like life is so stinking hard, man. And it's like, there's no shame. Like when something happens and you just have a hard time moving, you can't get out of bed. I would say, you know, on the far end, kind of like, you know, much like a surgeon, you would go see a psychiatrist, right? But sometimes maybe you don't need to see a psychiatrist. You know, maybe sometimes it's like things aren't adding up. You're trying to put things together. You're not sure what's going on. You just don't feel like you're hitting on all cylinders. I would say then you go to a psychologist. Now, like in the US, the biggest difference between a psychiatrist and a psychologist is that a psychiatrist can prescribe medicine, right? I think maybe in 5 states in the US, a psychologist can, but that's generally the biggest differentiator.
Yep.
Well, now guess what? In the last 15 years, the environment has completely changed for our mental health, right? It's like you think about 24/7 news coverage, which is terrible. It's always negative. It's fear-based. 24/7 connectivity, social media, but it's fake connection because you're not really connected, right? You know, the access that people have to you that can hurl insults at you, right? So anyway, point being is the environment has completely changed. Well, now, just like in the 1970s, we had to be proactive in our physical health. Mental performance is just a proactive approach to our mental health, right? It's like, how can I be more proactive to combat the environmental changes that aren't conducive to optimal mental health? And so I just think for me, every business that wants to perform better needs to have somebody or someone that people can have access to that allows people to be more proactive and how they can take care of their mindset.
Yeah, no, well said. I love that physical versus mental comparison. Absolutely nailed it. Derin, thanks so much for your time today. I've really enjoyed chatting with you, and we could go on and on, but we'll leave it there. And yeah, appreciate your time.
Oh man, I've loved this. Thanks so much, and just thanks for what you're doing, bringing awareness to how we can be better at work. Because it's like, and that's all we want to. I can tell you, like that's why I work at ReliaQuest, because it's like it's not just about performance at work. It's about how can I be a better performer as a community member? How can I be a better performer as a family member, as a brother, as a sister, as a friend? It's like, how can I just get better at life? Right. And that's what it's all about. And so thanks for what you're doing by bringing awareness to it.
Yeah, love it. No, thanks, mate.